wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord, a wonderful Savior to me. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, where rivers of pleasure I see. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows the dry, thirsty land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. A wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord. He taketh my burden away. He loaded me up, and I shall be moved. He gives me strength as my day. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows the dry, thirsty land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. When clothed in His brightness, transported I rise to meet Him in clouds of the sky. His perfect salvation, His wonderful love, I'll shout with the millions on high. He hides my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows the dry, thirsty land. He hides my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. Song by Steve Busby, 866.
This morning, I want to talk for a few minutes about our budget for next year and then talk about giving as well, the great relationship to that. We have the new budget ready. If you would like a copy of it, just see one of our elders and we'll get you a copy of that budget so that you can look at it if you like. One of the great things that has happened to us this year is the fact that we have surpassed our budget on average most of the time. And because of your generosity, we've been able to do several things above and beyond our budget. And I wanted to mention some of these things this morning. It's important that each of us understand that when we give of those things that God has given to us, that those things are being used to the glory and the honor of God, to the very best of the ability of those that make the decisions as to where the money goes. In fact, over 70% of our budget are monies that go to teaching or presenting the gospel. And that other 30%, when you consider electric bills, utility bills, that type of thing, it applies as well. Because our building and the heat and the cooling and those types of things allow us to to preach the gospel, hopefully more effectively, and to do some things that would be difficult for us to do without our building and without these facilities. But some of the things that you have been a part of this year, if indeed that you do contribute, we helped a Christian family with some $2,100 this year. It's not done at the same time. About 4 different times we helped this family to sort of get back on their feet. Blake Stevens, their house burned this past year, and we were able to give them $1,000. They lost everything in that house fire. We also had another brother in Christ that we helped with some $1,200 to deal with some issues and problems that he was facing. Tornado repair. The Jacksonville Church of Christ in Jacksonville, Alabama had some damage. They are the ones that produce the house-to-house flyers that we mail out a couple of times each year. We were able to send them $200. A mission trip to Zambia. Ron Gilbert is the missionary that we helped there. They print literature, Bibles, and that type of thing, songbooks that they can give out to those folks. We were able to send them $1,200. And then also to Ron Gilbert with that group, we sent another $500 also to help with some expenses in reference to literature and things that they were taking to Zambia. There's a girls' home in India. This was sort of started by the Cleveland Church. One of their young ladies in her memory. They have just a school there in India that is just for homeless girls. We were able to send them $1,000. Now remember that all of this is above the budget that we had this year. Celine Sparks, some of you may know Celine. She went on a mission trip to New Zealand where she spoke to the ladies there in their lectureship. We were able to help her $250 for that trip. Tennessee Children's Home that we do support with the coin cans and also with the food for their food truck. But we were able to send them $3,000 this year. A lot of their buildings are getting older. I think they were replacing windows, and that's what we particularly helped with. So building repairs, $3,000. What we still refer to as the East Tennessee School of Preaching. It's now known as Southeast. But the School of Preaching up at Carnes, they've used the Carnes Church building since their beginning, all the way back in 1971. They have now constructed another building there on the campus, and it's just for training preachers. It has a new library, classrooms, offices, and that type of thing. We were able to send them $3,000 to help in the training of preachers, but it was particularly for that new building. Myrtle Beach. The tornado that came in and affected mostly North and South Carolina. The Myrtle Beach Church did not suffer damage themselves. Some of their members did, but we were able to send them $2,000 to use in the helping of those members as well as in the community. Tennessee Children's Home. We also were able to help them with Thanksgiving dinner. It cost about $500. For each home that has house parents and so many children. But about $500 covers a Thanksgiving meal for them. We were able to do that this year. The Caverns Road Church down in Florida, Hurricane Michael, it came through there, did a lot of damage to their church building. 4 of their members lost everything, including their homes. We were able to send them $2,000. Jack Honeycutt, who works as a missionary in India, again, literature and that type of thing that they publish and take, we helped him $500. And then the Potter's Children's Home, we were able also to send them another $1,000. It also helped some of the needs that the children there on that campus had. I didn't add all of that up, but it's quite impressive list, I think. And there were some other things that we helped with as well this year that was above and beyond the budget. So a part of the money that you contributed went in these areas, as well as the regular budgeted items that we have for our missionaries and our preacher training schools in Knoxville, as well as the preacher school in Memphis. It's important, I think, when we talk about the budget, that it's much more than just putting a check or cash into the collection plate. But everything that you and I contribute goes to serve the Lord in some way. And as I've said many times, there are limits that you and I have in reference to serving in some particular areas. There are service areas that God has designated that are to be for the men, for the males. There are other areas wherein the ladies serve that the men would not be able to serve for different reasons. There are limits sometimes because of our age and our health and those types of things. But when it comes to giving, it's something that every single person can do. If you're down to your last dollar, you can still give a part of that. You think about the beautiful story in Luke 21 of the poor widow and the 2 mites, 2 little tiny Roman coins. We would maybe refer to it as 2 pennies, but if I understand correctly, it's probably less than the value of 2 pennies. And she gave those 2 mites, and the Lord observed what she gave and pointed out that in one way she gave more than all the wealthy folks had given, because they were casting in on their abundance. But she gave of her need. In fact, the Lord said all of her living. Obviously, her heart was in the right place. She wanted to contribute. She wanted to be a part, and that part was very, very vital and very, very important. So whatever you give, you need to understand and know that it goes to the glory and the honor of God. In fact, when we give, then we become partners or participants in this grace of giving with none other than God Himself. God truly has given to us and has blessed us with the privilege of being able to give back. The wise man Solomon in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, he says, honor the Lord with your possessions. Honor the Lord with your possessions. And then in verse 10, an interesting statement, he said, so that your barns will be filled with plenty. Obviously, this was written to those that were very aware of the need for a household to have a barn. All of the people were aware of that, and many of them did have animals, and they had crops and those types of things. We may not relate as quickly as maybe they would in their day, but the idea is that the Lord is going to bless us, and He's going to bless us bountifully if we truly honor the Lord with the possessions that He's given to us. So we have a command, but it is a command that is actually like all commands of things that we are commanded to do. And that is for us to understand, hopefully, and to know that everything that God tells us to do, it is for our good. Not for the good per se of God, but for your good and mine. So when we are commanded to come together for worship, that this worship is to help us. It is to encourage us. It is to lift us up. God is honored and praised when we do come together for worship. But God has instituted worship so that you and I can have the needed blessings that we have. Same thing is true with giving. It is to help us to be a part of something that is good, to know that we really matter. And regardless of the amount, again, whether it is like that poor widow with a few pennies, or whether it is a person that gives out of the abundance of their blessings, we all have the privilege and the honor, as well as the responsibility of being a part of the work that God has given us to do. As we think about giving, we need to carefully consider our priorities. And if we properly consider our priorities, then giving will be at the top of that list. In Luke chapter 16 and verse 13, Jesus talks about the fact that we cannot serve two masters. He says we cannot serve both God and mammon, or God and money. And in that context there, if you back up and begin reading with verse 16 and following, he talks about the Pharisees. And he says that the Pharisees were lovers of money. And one of the issues that they had was allowing material things to be more of a priority in their lives than it should have been. So as we think about our giving, we need to think about what truly is most important to us. It is possible for our possessions to, in a sense, possess us. In Luke chapter 12, the story of the rich farmer, you remember he had been so blessed that he didn't have barns big enough to store his blessings, so he resolved to tear them down and to build greater. He was being controlled by his possessions. Rather than using those possessions to the glory and the honor of God, he allowed them to control his thinking and his purpose in life. So rather than sharing those things that had been given to him, he simply was seeking to store them up and to use them for his own selfish benefit. We must look at our priorities and consider carefully the need to make sure that our priority, at least one of them, is to share the blessings that God has given to us with others. Secondly, it's important that we consider ownership and stewardship. We need to recognize that everything that we have, all that we have, belongs to God Himself. In Psalm chapter 24 and verse 1, the psalmist said, the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and all of those in it. A beautiful statement that hopefully helps us to understand that we are simply stewards. Even our very bodies belongs to the Lord. The world and those that are in it. The earth and all of its fullness. Even the very clothing that you and I are wearing. The vehicles that got us here. The money in our purses, in our pocketbooks. All of those things belong to God. So when we are asked to give, we are not giving per se what is ours, but we are simply giving back that which belongs to the Lord in the first place. And we need to recognize that even as that rich farmer in Luke 12 failed to recognize, thinking that all of those things that he possessed, and those barns that were full of the plenty, that it belonged to him, it really belonged to God. And he was failing to share those things. There's a sad statement made by the prophet Haggai in chapter 2 and in verse 8, where he talks about, I was thinking Malachi, go back to Haggai chapter 2, where he says that even the silver and the gold belong to the Lord. Everything that we have belongs to the Lord, and our stewardship must be in line with the understanding that what we have and what we possess belongs to God. Now back to Malachi. In Malachi chapter 2, he talks about the danger of people robbing God. And in fact, the children of Israel were guilty of that. And they were robbing God with their tithes and with their offerings. They were also guilty of giving to God or sacrificing to God those things that were inferior, those things that were left over. And as a result, they were displeasing to God and were being rejected by God. Our giving says so much about our hearts and our lives, whether we're talking about giving within our families, within the community, or what we might put into the collection plate. In Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19, you remember Jesus said, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moths and rust does corrupt, and where thieves can break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where those things don't happen." He says, "Then for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." The Apostle Paul, in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and also in chapter 9, talked to the Christians in Corinth about their giving. And he said that their giving would prove their sincerity of their love. In 2 Corinthians 8, as he begins in that chapter, he uses the churches of Macedonia as an example for the churches of Corinth. And he points out that those folks gave even beyond their ability. Out of their very poverty they gave. But he noted that the reasoning behind it was that they first gave of themselves. They first gave of themselves. In other words, their heart was in it. He goes on to say to the Corinthians that they were abounding in a lot of areas. Their faith, their knowledge, their sincerity. He says, even your love for us has abounded. But I desire that you abound in this grace also. And he was talking about the ability that they had, the opportunity that they had to give to the poor saints in Judea that experienced a terrible famine. So they needed to look at where their hearts were at, to see whether or not their heart truly was in doing those things that were good and right. Also, I think as we consider giving, we need to give because we are to be a people of love. And again, to prove our love for God, it is done many times through our willingness to give, not just of money, but the time and effort and opportunities. In John chapter 3, verse 16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but should have everlasting life." God was willing to give the Son of God to live and to die for us. And then in Ephesians 5 and verse 25, we find that Jesus Christ loved the church, and He gave Himself for it. So here are two passages that talk about God's love and how that love is expressed. And that love is expressed in giving. Paul was saying that very same thing there. In 2 Corinthians 8, particularly verses 7 and 8, where he noted that the Corinthians would prove the sincerity of their love by their willing to give of those things that God had before blessed and given to them. So, do we love God? One of the ways that we can know whether we love God or not is by looking at whether or not we truly are giving. Whether or not we truly are having our heart where it ought to be. One of the ways that we can also evaluate that is through looking at the fact that our giving is to be purposed and planned. Again, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, Paul pointed out to the Corinthians that they need to purpose in their hearts. In 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2, he also said to the church at Corinth that they were to lay by and store on the first day of the week, that there would be no need for collections when he came, making reference to this particular collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem. But there was to be a purposing, there was to be a planning upon the first day of the week. And a person is to purpose in their hearts to determine what it is that we can do. And then look at what we can do and try to the very best of our abilities to give cheerfully, but also to give sacrificially as well. So our giving must be in the right spirit. If it is grudgingly, and Paul warns against that, if we're doing it because we feel that we have to, and indeed we are commanded, and yet when we obey the commands of God, as we develop and as we grow, we must understand that we must learn to do these things because we love God and because we want to do that which is good and right. It is then that we submit ourselves faithfully to all of the commands, and thus that type of obedience is the type of obedience that pleases God. It is that type of obedience that God honors and respects. Giving, a privilege and an honor. But you know, true giving, from the standpoint of money, time, and abilities, really begins, as it did with the Macedonians, by truly giving of ourselves. And that begins by developing a faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, being willing to repent of our sins and try to do better, to live better. The desire to be immersed, baptized for the remission of our sins. Knowing that God, through His love and through His great gift of Jesus Christ and the blood that was shed, will then add us to the church because we've been obedient to the gospel plan. And then, by being a part of the church, we again have that honor and that privilege of serving and truly giving. We might be able to sum up Christianity in many ways by that simple word. The things that God has given to us and the things that we then have a turn to give to others in the service and honor of God. This morning, if you need to become a Christian, if you need to change your heart, your life in some public way or a public statement needs to be made, the invitation is yours as we stand.
Free. God in heaven, we're thankful for this hour we could be here to worship and praise you, Lord. We just pray that as we go our separate ways, that you'll help each of us to apply this to our lives, that we want to bring glory to you. Help us each day to be transformed.